team of Gaieski, Corrigan, and Pastore. Meanwhile, on the right, they're going to face off against Johnson, Uppal, and Fogle. And we're going to start over in Standard, where we're watching Azorius Aggro versus Esper Control. You see a couple mirror matches over in the other slots. We'll get there if there's time, but we want to start with this more diverse matchup, and one of the pillars of Standard, to be sure.
Jack Fogle, somewhat under the radar, I believe GP Memphis champion.
GP champion, absolutely.
And Kellen Pastore, newly minted Platinum Pro.
Yeah, not a bad run from Kellen recently. Two top-notch players battling right now.
So I think team on the left, Gaieski, Corrigan, Pastore, very, very active tournament grinders. You see these three at a wide variety of different tournaments. And then on the right, some semi-retired players who are showing they can still hang.
Gotta love those semi-retirements, a common theme here in the Magic world. Meanwhile, a decent start from Pastore. No one drop, but we do have the best two drop possibly in the matchup in the form of a Danto Vanguard, followed up by History of Benalia. Definitely the three drop you're looking for there. We're going to have a Thought Erasure.
I would kind of argue that Tithe Taker is a little bit stronger than a Danto Vanguard because of Moment of Craving, but it's close.
I think you can make that argument. I would listen to it.
They both lose out to Cry of the Carnarium, so it's a wash there. Yeah, no one drop is certainly not where you want to be, but it also might mean that Pastore has a little bit of a more robust hand, which can be very helpful in this matchup for being able to fight through Kaya's Wrath, Cry of the Carnarium, stuff like that. And Fogle is kind of stumbling a little bit, only having the core set duels as ETB tapped. And now we see Basic Swamp that'll turn on some of them, but not any further Glacial Fortresses.
Yeah, certainly mana issues are a recurring theme with this Esper deck. You kind of take some damage from your lands, you occasionally get stuck with some tapped ones, and you do that all in search of this powerful spell base, things like Kaya's Wrath, Thought Erasure, as you just saw. But the beats are coming fast from Pastore here, and there's going to be some follow-up plays as well, possibly in the form of your favorite two-drop, Tithe Taker.
Not my favorite two-drop.
Oh, okay, just here. Don't want to give it too much credit. No, actually, it looks like Pastore is going to pass the turn back to Fogle.
He says, this is good. I have enough pressure. I have a History of Benalia ready to go off next turn.
Yeah, I think he's right.
My opponent basically needs a Kaya's Wrath, Cry of the Carnarium, or it's bust. So there's really no reason to further commit to the battlefield at this point.
Fogle going to go ahead and take a look at that baffling end. Not likely to be super relevant here. And there is the Cry of the Carnarium. That's going to go ahead and clean up the battlefield. So good read from Pastore. Didn't expose more than he had to. But Fogle's got to be happy to be sitting at a somewhat stable 12 life. And also that History of Benalia. Just going to do nothing. How's this for a follow-up? Another History of Benalia ready to put more knights onto the battlefield.
Basically the best possible follow-up.
Oh, yeah. Army in a can. Fogle's going to go ahead, take a draw here. You see Teferi coming off the top of the deck. Do we have a fifth land to deploy it? I think the answer is no.
No, hand is 2 Teferis, 2 Absorbs, Chemist's Insight, and Vraska's Contempt. So
it sounds nice if we can turn the corner, but this is going to be a key stretch of the matchup to see if Fogle can just get to that point where Esper Control is able to take over the game.
Yeah, and Fogle has basically all the options. He can hold open counterspell mana in the form of Absorb. If Pastore doesn't play anything, then he can use Vraska's Contempt. Or even Chemist's Insight to try and dig.
Here's the Tithe Taker. I think that's going to be met with the Absorb. Pastore just asking Fogle to fix the mana tap. Does so.
Good old Basic Swamp Absorb deck.
Pastore does have a follow-up, though, in the form of Dauntless Bodyguard, adding a little bit more beats to the battlefield. That is, of course, a knight for History of Benalia, right?
Oh, of course.
Gets the +2, +1. Makes this attack very threatening on the next turn.
So representing 12 damage with Fogle now back up to 13 thanks to the Absorb. So not quite lethal, but getting your opponent down to 1 makes everything just a lethal threat. It must be dealt with.
Absolutely.
And this Azorius aggro deck is very good at overcoming the first sweeper, and it generally hinges on whether or not Esper Control is able to sweep the board a second time.
So we have found the fifth land. It's going to be used to deploy Teferi. That's going to go ahead and minus taking care of one of those Knight tokens. Just trying to buy a little time, a little life. That's what Teferi's happy to do in this matchup. There you see History of Benalia going to hit its final stage, +2/1 to both those creatures on the battlefield.
Yeah, not the ideal use for Teferi. You're effectively using it as a 5-mana answer to half of the 3-mana card that your opponent played.
Right.
And then maybe the hope is that it soaks up some additional damage, but
not going to here.
Yeah, the Conclave Tribunal doesn't have a whole lot of uses anyway. The damage is really important, so I really like the use of Kellen to use the Tribunal on the Teferi, even though it was only at 1 loyalty.
Fogle's going to go ahead and fall to, I believe he's looking at 5 now. But has a follow-up Teferi, could use that to answer this knight if he wants to, could try and draw some cards.
So a third copy of Teferi in the hand. So
happy to burn those Teferis now, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. If Jack only had the second Teferi, I might be thinking like, oh, maybe you want to save that one to actually have a card draw engine.
Right.
But at this point, I think it's perfectly reasonable to just deploy it, get rid of the Knight token for good, and then maybe soak up some damage from that Dauntless Bodyguard.
Could also just plus. Teferi will survive an attack here if you plus, and then you have the possibility of hitting a land and having 3 mana available.
That's risky, though, because if you don't hit the land, your opponent draws Benelish Marshal, Unstable Formation, anything like that. You could just be facing down lethal.
I think that's very true, and I think Fogle probably properly took the safer line, just minusing the Teferi on the Knight token.
Basically using it like a Vraska's Contempt.
Yeah.
You got rid of a creature, saved 2 life.
That's fine. It's the less versatile Vraska's Contempt at this point. And now Fogle feels comfortable to go ahead, take that plus, does find a land, meaning he's going to have access to absorb mana on his next turn, and I think this game possibly starting to slip away from Pastore. Have to see if he can somehow produce these last 3 points of damage. That's always the struggle against these Esper control decks. You have to find those final points to push through, and that is a Snubhorn Sentry. No power on that Snubhorn Sentry thus far.
Not quite yet. 7 permanents. No Star City's Blessing so far.
No, not quite. Looks like that is going to resolve. Pastore follows up with the land.
That's permanent number 8. Very likely that Snubhorn will be able to attack for 3 on the next turn, but you got to imagine that Fogle has all the answers at this point.
Yep, starting to put those answers together. We know there's a Vraska's Contempt in hand. Can use some mana proactively now to maybe cast Chemister's Insight since you know you're getting the untapped from the Teferi. Let's see what exactly Fogle wants to do with his mana here.
Looks like another fancy FNM promo Thought Erasure.
Yeah, flashy Thought Erasures there. I love them. Here is that Thought Erasure. Going to take a look. Get rid of the Baffling End. Only a Plains left in hand from Pastore. Got to be a little worried now. This is a spot you do not want to be in as the Azorius aggro player.
In a situation like this, you can even consider just running out the Baffling End as an additional permanent for the Snubhorn Sentry.
I think it's worth considering. And there we have a cast down taking care of that Dauntless Bodyguard. It's funny, that almost functions as like 2 removal spells because it's further blunting the Snubhorn Sentry and preventing it from doing anything. Here you finally see Chemister's Insight from Fogle looking to reload. Gonna go ahead, take a draw. Just has everything now. Teferi ticking up to 7 loyalty, getting closer and closer to that game-ending ultimate.
So the blue splash out of this Azorius aggro deck is just for sideboard counter spells. And the version of this deck that players played last season included a red splash for things like heroic reinforcements. So they actually had game. They actually had a chance to win games from this sort of position, whereas this deck is just all white creatures, pump spells, maybe some removal spells, and your opponent has a Teferi on 7, a bunch of spot removal spells. You basically have no outs at this point.
Yeah, the reach is gone. That has changed from these decks. They aren't able to generate advantage there. And there you see the Vraska's Contempt, the lethal Vraska's Contempt cast by Jack Fogle. That is going to entice a scoop from Kellen Pastore.
That's not how that works.
And we're going to head over to our sideboarded games here. And I do think this matchup significantly improves in post-board games for the Azorius aggro decks. Take a look at Kellen Pastore's options. You see there 4 Tocatli Honor Guard, 3 Disdainful Stroke. Interesting, favoring Disdainful Stroke over Negate here. 2 Ajani, Adversary of Tyrants, 2 Baffling Ends, 1 Deputy of Detention, 1 Negate, 1 Unbreakable Formation, and 1 Island to smooth out that blue splash a little bit. Jerry, what are you looking to do in Kellen's seat right now?
Well, you need the counter spells. That's kind of what they're there for. You have Disdainful Stroke that can tag either the Sweepers, Kaya's Wrath, or the Hostage Takers that a lot of players sideboard. And negate also helps with the sweepers. You want some Ajani, Adversary of Tyrants, to be recurring those 2 drops, but worth noting that Cry of Carnarium does exile, so sometimes Cry will leave you without a real target for Ajani, but at the very least, you can also just be pumping up your team and getting them out of Cry of Carnarium range that way.
Very true.
Deputy of Detention, I think, is also fine. Most players would board in Thief of Sanity, Hostage Taker, and that's a good, clean answer against it that also can take out a Search for his Kanto or a Teferi in a proactive way. You know, you don't want to be sitting on Conclave Tribunal. You'd much rather put out this 3 toughness creature that also deals with those cards. And
let me push you on the other side of things. What do you think Pastore wants to move away from in these post-board games? Which of his cards are really blunted by Esper control? Is he looking to get away from something like Adanto Vanguard, which now there's a lot of answers to in the form of Moment of Craving, in the form of Cry of Carnarium? Or is just the interaction with Kaya's Wrath too good and you want to keep that present?
Well, also it's just your fastest clock and maybe your strongest individual threat, aside from History of Benalia. So I think I would be more willing to move away from some of the 1-drops because they're the weakest cards. You don't necessarily want to draw multiples of them.
Okay.
And then at that point, you might start looking at removing some copies of Venerated Loxodon, especially post-board when you're boarding in these counter spells and Planeswalkers. And Venerated Loxodon is stronger with the amount of creatures that you can put onto the battlefield early. But you don't want to play Venerated Loxodon for 4 mana and tap your only threat. That's not really what your deck wants to be doing, especially post-board.
Makes a lot of sense to me. Why don't we go ahead and look at Jack Fogle's sideboard. There you see 1 copy of Lyra Dawnbringer, 2 The Eldest Reborn, 2 Hostage Takers, 3 Duress, 3 Moment of Craving, and finally, of course, the 4 Thief of Sanity. Jerry, what are you liking from Jack's side?
I like everything except for the Eldest Reborn. The creatures are very, very strong against Azorius. You can make a case for Thief of Sanity not being good enough on the draw because you won't necessarily have a good window to try and resolve that. But it's basically like a cheaper Teferi. Like we saw Teferi in the last game actually act like a removal spell, but for 5 mana, that's just a little too clunky. You know the opposition is going to be bringing in Disdainful Stroke, Spell Pierce, Negate, things along those lines. Thief just gets under it. It's such a cheap threat.
Right.
And then Hostage Taker is something that can completely stabilize the board on its own. Lyra basically the same way. Duress is able to fight through their sideboard counterspells, Unbreakable Formations, History of Benalias, like all these really powerful cards that the Azorius aggro deck has access to. And then Moment of Craving is just additional removal that has a small upside when you're trying to buffer your life total and just buy a bunch of time.
And are you on board with the typical plan from these Esper control decks? They become more of a tap-out control deck in post-board games, cutting a lot of the counter magic and often Teferis, like you mentioned. Is that how you want to approach it from their side?
I want to cut some Teferis, like maybe 1 or 2, but I definitely don't want to cut all of them. Chemister's Insight is another card you could trim. Absorb is also a little on the clunky side and matches up pretty horribly against Tithe Taker.
Okay. Very interesting. I think this is a very interesting matchup. And if you are looking to possibly get a chance to play this matchup, you're going to have to come out to one of our SCG events. Let's take a look at the rest of the Season 1 schedule here. Of course, we're in Cincinnati presently. In 2 weeks, April 6th and 7th, we will be in Cleveland. And by we, I mean exactly me and Jerry Thompson. We're going to cast that alongside Cedric Phillips and Patrick Sullivan. Can't wait to take a trip to the land. I know Cedric will be happy to be back in his hometown. After that, headed to Richmond, May 4th and 5th. Guess what? We're going to be there again, Jerry, me and you, May 4th and 5th, casting the Richmond Open. That one is standard. After that, SCG Tour is going to head up to Syracuse on May 18th and 19th. We're going to sit that one out, let the other folks have the fun. But we're back on come May 25th and May 26th when we head to Louisville for the Modern Open. And, of course, who could forget June 7th through 9th, SCGCon. Can't wait for it. So many exciting things at SCGCon that we've been talking about throughout the day. Why don't we take a look at the play mats that you could get at these events. You see, I believe this is our standard play mat. So if you're participating in one of the standard SCG tours, you'll get access to this. Let's have a look at that modern one. Beautiful artwork on the angel there. And finally, we have, of course, our legacy play mat. I believe that's called Loftstone Citadel. Beautiful, beautiful art for all 3 play mats. And of course, those are free exclusively when you enter any Open, Classic, Infinite Challenge, or Sealed Spectacular package. If you need to take a look at that schedule, head on over to our website. We got you covered there. Looks like our players are shuffled up and ready to go to Game 2. Over in the Dredge Mirror, we see Justin Uppal has gone up a game, 1-0, in that ever-enticing Dredge Mirror. Ideal start here for Pastore with 3 1-drops, looking to flip Legion's Landing on his 3rd turn.
Yeah, this is a great start, especially if you have something like Benelish Marshall as a thing that can pump your team and live through Cry of the Carnarium, because at this point, Fogle is basically on Cry turn 3 or bust.
Yeah, things could get out of control real quick here. Let's see if Fogle has a removal spell at the ready, if he can prevent that Legion's Landing from coming online. There is a cast down that's going to clean up one of those Dauntless Bodyguards. You just have to make that play. This game gets away from you so fast if you allow that Legion's Landing to flip.
Yeah, you got to do your best to try and keep up. And it is very difficult when the aggro deck has a bunch of 1-mana threats and you have like 2 and 3 and 4 mana removal. But that's where the sweepers come into play, and you hope to recoup a little bit of that tempo.
And I do not see a Cry of the Carnarium in Fogle's hand. That certainly would be snap-fired off here if it was available. Let's see what the play is. It's going to be Mortify on that Bodyguard. Still prioritizing keeping Pastore off that flipped Legion's Landing, and I think rightfully so.
Yeah, Pastore missed a land drop. He's still doing all right, obviously. He's using his mana every turn, playing a good amount of threats each turn.
And he drew that land now, so he's going to play a Sky Marcher Aspirant. What's the follow-up here? Going to make that third land drop. A Johnny ready to go in hand. And the last play is another copy of Legion's Landing. So now 4 creatures on the battlefield and a Johnny ready to go in the backup role. This is an explosive start from Pastore.
I like this because Kellen figured out that Fogle did not have a Cry of the Carnarium. If Fogle had it, he would have snap-cast it.
Yep.
And now, even against Kaya's Wrath, you can keep the Danto Vanguard indestructible, so you get to keep a threat around. Yep. Oh, and Fogle can't even cast the Wrath because he has the basic island.
Good point. Yeah, all green lights for Pastore there, and picked up on them immediately and just dumped his hand onto the battlefield. We talk a lot about the dance between extension and holding back enough resources in reserve to survive a Wrath. These are the type of hints you need to look for on the aggro side to know exactly how much to commit to the board. And in this case, Pastore was like, all of it. You can have all of it.
Yeah, I mean, Pastore is not able to get punished from this.
Correct.
At all. And you see Fogle head in hand. He's struggling to figure out what he can do to actually get out of this.
Yeah, this is a terrifying spot to be in as the control player. I don't know if there's a 4th land either in Fogle's hand, and that will make this almost insurmountable. Let's see. What are we pulling to the front here? Okay, we do have a 4th land. It's going to be tapped Hallowed Fountain. Option to Mortify here. Just going to go ahead and pass the turn back. Over in our Legacy Death and Taxes mirror, you see Ethan Gaieski up a game against Adam Johnson. Here comes the team. Pastore sending everyone. The Sky Marcher Aspirant is going to hit the graveyard. That was the best option for Fogle here to preserve some life. But unfortunately, this has now flipped Legion's Landing, and we know what one of the last 2 cards in Pastore's hand is. It's a Johnny, Adversary of Tyrant. Can either make the team a little bit bigger or bring back a threat from the graveyard. I think we're just going to put a few counters on our creatures here and present lethal on the next turn.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think you still want to play around the potential sweeper. You don't want to minus the Ajani, get hit with the sweeper, and then next turn you would have to use up the rest of the loyalty on the Ajani if you wanted to minus again.
Right.
So Pastore just still playing this basically as patiently as possible, trying to mitigate the impact of those sweepers, and I think he's doing a really good job of it.
I think just a land off the top for Fogle. Has Hostage Taker in hand, but unfortunately no 1-drop to steal here. That would be nice to have 2 blockers at the ready. Just going to have to go ahead and take that Adanto Vanguard instead, though.
That's fine. Now you have a 2/3 on the battlefield. You can block the 2/2 currently. Can certainly block the 1/1. Ajani might threaten to get the 2/2 up to a 3/3 and then be able to keep attacking.
Right.
So.
May have to just eat 3 damage here. I think Fogle is kind of okay with that. Not the worst possible turn considering what he's been facing down, and may get access to another blocker on the next turn. Let's see what the follow-up is here from Pastore. It's going to be a Dauntless Bodyguard, and it's willing to play out his hand, put the last land onto the battlefield. Okay, I think this one's tight. I think Fogle needs help, but I see some ways out. Has to put together the right string of draws now. Looks like we found an Absorb. So some number of Absorbs still in the deck in the post-board games.
Yeah, I'm not shocked to see some in, but it is almost certainly a card that you would want to trim on.
Yep, that makes sense.
Yeah, Pastore has 3 attackers currently. Adanto is going to make another Vampire at the end of Jack's turn. Ajani's going to be able to threaten to pump them up. And if Jack doesn't have any help. It looks like he's going to be attacked with 4 2-power creatures with only 2 blockers.
Yeah, he kind of needs Pastore to play a spell here so he can use Absorb to survive the turn, unless we're missing something in hand. And that may be one of those fancy cast downs in hand. Let's see. Here's some counters from a Johnny. Johnny, by the way, threatening ultimate very soon. Certainly has to be fearing that.
I don't know that I've ever seen that ultimate happen.
I saw an incredibly drawn-out match. It was actually this exact matchup, and I saw it in a Johnny Ultimate against Kane Reinhard when we were in Baltimore. And Kane basically had it all. His hand was absolutely stocked, and he was able to fight through the tokens for so many turns. And just at some point, it's too much. And it will take over this match if it ultimates without question. The Esper deck can put up a fight for a little while. It has tools to answer the threats, but ultimately, that emblem almost always going to carry the day.
So Kellen makes some 3-power attackers and a 1-power attacker, which makes the hostage taker a little awkward on blocking duty. Can trade with the Dauntless Bodyguard, but there's still lethal damage coming through, so Jack needs a removal spell.
Do you think he has the cast down here? Going to go ahead and fire that off on the token. Only taking 1 damage here. Going to fall down to 2, but didn't clean up that much of the battlefield. Of course, Adanto the First Fort at the ready as well. We don't know what Pastore drew for the turn.
Yeah,
but still in a pretty good spot here.
Bodyguard trades with Hostage Taker. Pastore still has a 3/3 left around, and a 1/1 is going to be able to make another 1/1. And Fogle either needs to, well, even a board wipe won't do it because Adanto plus a Johnny is going to be lethal. So he would either need to present 2 blockers.
Right.
Or I don't know. It's a tall order.
Yeah, not sure there's any outs here for Fogle, quite frankly. It's one of those things where if your life total gets too low and you're facing down Adanto the First Fort, there's almost nothing you can do in many spots. And I think this is just a desperation to Ferry. We're going to go ahead and pick him up and head off to a deciding Game 3. High stakes here. You see that Justin Uppal has taken down the Dredge matchup against Abe Corrigan. So this is a huge match for both of these teams. Let's bring up these sideboards again. Anything you want to change based on being on the draw now from the Azorius aggro side?
I don't think so. I mean, you know that your opponent has Hostage Taker now, which
probably knew anyway.
While is pretty standard, it is nice to have confirmation. You didn't see anything too special. You did see that at least 1 Teferi was left in the deck. You know, like you can kind of inform yourself a little bit about what Fogle is up to, but I think that Kellen basically knows already. I think he's good.
How about on Fogle's side? Any changes you want to make being on the play instead?
If Thief of Sanity was not already in on the draw, I would fully expect it to be in on the play.
Agree.
And we didn't see any dresses. We didn't see any Moment of Cravings, but I think that those are cards that you still want to consider as well.
I think I saw a lot of cards out of Fogle's deck that I wasn't super pleased about. There were cards we were talking about trimming, and they popped up in that game. So we don't know if Fogle made the same moves that we wanted to make, or if there was just multiple copies of those cards and Fogle got a little unlucky drawing them at the wrong time. Hard to say based on what we saw, but you see how you can get punished by having a handful of Teferis against this deck. Absolutely obliterated under the face of that extremely explosive 1-drop, 1-drop, 1-drop start.
Yeah, and I think that game was also just a lesson that the sweepers do matter a lot.
Oh, yeah.
They save you so much headache if you're able to just fire off Cry the Carnarium on turn 3. And initially, people were just like, oh, obviously you just play 4 Kaya's Wrath in this deck, just call it a day, no big deal.
Too slow.
And, yeah, a little bit too slow. You saw Fogle with the Island also, which is kind of necessary because you only have access to 16 blue sources if you just play all dual lands, which isn't really enough to cast Absorb. You generally want like 17 or 18, so you have to play the Island with the Kaya's Wraths, and that's a little awkward, but Cry the Carnarium is also just a thing that is a mana cheaper. It's not good in some situations, and you saw Kellen trying to play around as best he could, making his things 3 toughness.
Right.
So there is counterplay to it, but it is a necessary evil.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. These decks really took off when they started adapting a few copies of that card. They moved to the next level. So if our broadcast wraps up today and you just haven't had enough SCG in your life, you need to see more showdowns from some of the best players on the planet, you need to be watching the SCG Live series. Of course, every Tuesday and Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern, head over to twitch.tv/SCG Tour, and you'll see often Todd Anderson, Ross Merriam, some special guests battling with some of the best decks across all formats. They'll play standard matchups. They'll play modern matchups. They'll play legacy matchups. They'll play made-up formats, pretending cards that are in Modern Horizons possibly exist. And, you know, what does Modern look like with Hymn to Torok in it? Spoiler, it's ugly. It's real ugly.
I believe it, man. They're also recently playing with the London Mulligan. So if you're curious to see how that plays out, that's another thing that you could check out. And I've bookmarked that to watch for later because, you know, obviously that's in my wheelhouse.
Very pertinent to you.
Yeah, I need to know exactly what's going on there. I have my guesses, but it would be nice to actually get some confirmation.
Yeah. Meanwhile, over in our legacy Death and Taxes mirror, it's a game apiece. This is a very, very tight match here. Looks like Pastore is satisfied with his opener. Gonna go ahead and keep 7. I believe Fogle probably on a mulligan here to 6.
Or just taking his sweet time shuffling.
Or the slowest shuffler on the planet, also a possibility. Don't think that's the case, though.
So we're going deep in the tournament, right? Both these teams are very live for top 8 contention. You see both of them playing Death and Taxes and Dredge. And then you see Esper and Azorius Aggro, which are the second and third most popular decks.
Right.
Do you think that there's something to this Death and Taxes Dredge lineup? I don't know. Every time I've seen Dredge, they just seem to be getting clowned by Amulet.
Well, these are the 2 Dredge decks in the tournament right now. These are the last 2 Dredge players, and you're spot on. It's an awful Amulet matchup where Amulet is the second most played deck. Little scary to be playing a lot of Dredge. Also, there's the problem of main deck Surgical Extraction. Like, Surgical Extraction isn't the best card against Dredge. We all know that. It doesn't stop them from doing what they're going to do. But having copies in the main deck is a fundamental change. As Dredge, you're usually like, okay, I'm going to do my thing unimpeded in this first game, and then I need to find a way to win these second and third games. Sometimes just having that Surgical Extraction at the right moment can be enough to keep Dredge from stealing game 1, and now they're on the back foot across the next 2 games as opposed to just 1.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I'm not sure it's enough to actually move the needle, but yeah, there are fewer Dredge decks in the field than maybe I would have expected, and we see 2 of them going pretty deep. So,
Yes, we do. Couple of 1-drops here from Pastore to start off. Here is the Thief of Sanity we discussed. Also going to be a fine blocker for that 1/1 creature. Follow up here, it's just going to be a Sky Marcher Aspirant, and then 5 mana is going to be tapped, or excuse me, 4 mana is going to be tapped. It's going to deploy a Conclave Tribunal, eating up that Thief of Sanity, and Dauntless Bodyguard is going to rumble into the red zone, dealing 2 damage to Fogle. Timely Conclave Tribunal there.
yeah, a card that is kind of awkward because it's not very good in game 1, but it gets a lot better in the post-board games.
You see Fogle with both Moment of Craving and, I believe, Cast Down in hand, so has some removal spells, could be able to keep that Legion's Landing from coming online, but we're going to fire off a Thought Erasure here. Oh. Just these.
All gas.
Just these 3 perfect 3-drops that I'm ready to deploy after you take whichever one you'd like. What do you like here, Jerry? Which card would you take?
Depends on the texture of Fogle's hand. If he has Cry the Carnarium, Benelish Marshal is probably what you want to take because Cry can mop up History of Benalia. But if you're just sitting on a bunch of spot removal spells, then History seems like the strongest card.
With the spot removal in hand, now a difficult decision going into this next turn. Now, I'm not sure if there actually is a cast down, so maybe this is easier than it seems because you would just fire off this Moment's Craving and prevent the Legion's Landing from flipping here. And that is, in fact, what's going to happen. Sky Marcher Aspirant gets -2/-2, gaining 2 life from the Moment of Craving. Follow-up, though, History of Benalia.
Waiting until combat for that Moment of Craving could have potentially been disastrous if Pastore was able to draw a negate or spell pierce like these decks sometimes play.
Looks like the draw there was a Thief of Sanity. Still another Moment of Craving in hand for Fogle. But that battlefield getting mighty crowded.
You live or die by the sweeper, I think.
I think so. It's just too much to ask your deck to do to overcome this kind of ruthless aggression from the Azorius aggro deck without access to either Cry or Kaya's Wrath.
You can't 1-for-1 History of Benalia. You can't 1-for-1 Legion's Landing. That's eventually going to transform into a Danto. So the 1-for-1 removal spells are solid, especially if you're able to Moment of Craving something like an Adanto Vanguard. But for the most part, you need something to either mop up the smaller creatures or have this big sort of body that can block multiple things.
Well, I think you're spot on.
And Thief of Sanity, if given enough time, could accomplish that, but the Conclave Tribunal was very timely.
Yeah, and now the second copy of Thief of Sanity just going to get outsized by this Benelish Marshal, going to make every single attacker potentially lethal to the Thief of Sanity. That's also going to go ahead and flip that Adanto the first fort. A lot of damage headed Fogle's way, and of course, more in the holster with the History of Benalia threatening to go off next turn.
I think Jack is going to need to hit his opponent with this Thief of Sanity and hope that Kellen somehow has Akaya's Wrath.
That would be nice. Also, one more draw step. Could just pull it off the top of the deck. Even then, I think he's just barely stabilized via Akaya's Wrath. With the perfect draw, he only has a small chance. That's what I believe right now.
Yeah, there's still Dauntless Bodyguard protecting a token. The History of Benalia is going to... well, I guess it's protecting a vampire, right? So I guess that's not going to do anything. But
there is the block on the Dauntless Bodyguard.
Yeah, Jack knows that playing to Kaya's Wrath
has to draw it. Has to draw it. I think it's another Moment of Craving. Maybe that's a Cry?
2 p.m.
Is Cry enough to stay alive here? Cry with an additional land could be Moment of Craving on the Benelish Marshal as well, but unfortunately no 5th land here from Fogle.
Yeah, so you could potentially get the full clear, but it doesn't look like Fogle has the tools, and now, can he get one more draw step? Can he actually, does he have enough to actually get rid of like 2 creatures, I guess? And cast down the Benelish Marshal.
Okay.
That'll get you there.
Moment of Craving, okay. Okay, we're kind of sort of doing it. Gonna take 5 damage this turn from the creatures that are present, but gained a little life. Oh, just the perfect draw. A Johnny ready to pump up the battlefield and present a persistent threat that'll stick around after Cry.
So we were looking at 5 damage before, 4 from the Knight, 1 from the Vampire. A Johnny threatens another 2.
Yep.
And I think I like this because this puts Jack down to 4. You have a Johnny on 5. Even if your board gets swept, you can spend the next 2 turns minusing and activating a Danto. So you have 2 more reloads, basically.
Great way of looking at it.
And then even after that, you can use a Johnny to pump your team, if that's relevant.
Sure. Kellen agrees entirely.
So Kellen is going to be threatening lethal for the next 3 turns effectively. So Jack needs a ton of help here.
Just going to extend the hand here. Says that's enough. I know I can't overcome what you're presenting. And that means Kellen Pastore are going to take down the match. Or excuse me, not the match for his team. Just even the match up. 1 match apiece. And that means we're going to head over to our Legacy Death and Taxes mirror to determine who exactly is going to take down this match and put themselves in prime position for a top 8. And our spotters down there in the feature match area have done us a solid and held this match for us. So we're going to get to see the entirety of Game 3 in this Death and Taxes mirror. Jerry, what do you know about the Death and Taxes mirror?
There are a lot of activated abilities and game actions that are going to be taken, and in true Death and Taxes fashion, not a whole lot's going to be accomplished.
A lot of little, tiny, small, incremental plays. This is one of those matchups that can snowball really quickly, where just one of the players gets completely closed out. Either they have the wrong type of mana and get beat up by Wasteland and Rashad Import, or, you know, Stoneforge Mystic puts an unbeatable equipment on the battlefield too soon, GT gets online, something like that. But sometimes it can drag on forever and ever.
Maybe neither player has found a way to break through. There are Mother of Runes on both sides.
Yeah.
Maybe like some Batterskull germs staring at each other, making things difficult too. So we'll see how bogged down this game actually gets.
It's kind of one or the other. It's either a stomp or we're going to settle in for the long haul here. There you see Adam Johnson with a fine start. Going to play Aether Vial on turn 1.
White bordered Rashad Import into white bordered Aether Vial.
The rarest of all these cards. Here you see Phyrexian Revoker coming down, naming Ether Vial going to stop that from cheating on mana. Force Adam Johnson to play fair here.
I like that. That's a big play. I mean, Ethan was on the back foot. Adam led with Rashad Port, which could give away some information about his hands. Maybe he doesn't actually have access to a basic plains, and you don't necessarily want to run Caracas out there, just get it wastelanded if that's your only white source.
Very true. But in a moment of desperation, you certainly will do so if you have to. Certainly there's going to be Swords to Plowshares around, so I don't know if that Aether Vial is going to stay locked up forever. Also, there's Containment Priest. Flash on that card coming down, ready to pick off this Phyrexian Revoker. Let's see if there's a response. I do see a Swords to Plowshares in hand for Gaieski.
Players just vying for Aether Vial dominance.
Ethan's going to allow the block there. Very interesting. Here's a follow-up Ancient Tomb and a follow-up Phyrexian Invoker. Now that makes a ton of sense. Coming back down. I'm assuming it's naming Aether Vial one more time. Let's see if we can get an activation here. Looks like no. No one drop in hand. There you see our handy-dandy reminder letting you know exactly what the Phyrexian Invoker is sitting on. Still going to go ahead and tick up that Aether Vial. Like we said, plenty of ways to get Phyrexian Revoker off the battlefield. Doesn't mean it's not going to be online later in the game.
Yeah, Revoker is a completely fine card, but one that I've always been underwhelmed with, just because in these sorts of matchups, it doesn't attack or block very well. It's like a 2-mana Pithing Needle that's also vulnerable to creature removal. It just kind of sits there. And obviously, there are some matchups like Storm where the extra clock actually helps. It's a body that can potentially wear equipment, so it does have upside, but a lot of the time, it looks kind of mopey.
I think you would say that about a lot of the cards in the Death and Taxes deck individually, right? It's kind of about its pieces and how all these cards come together to form a cohesive package more than any one individual card.
Nah, it's only Revoker. All the other cards in the deck are just
everything else is straight fire. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, here's a pretty straight fire card. Recruiter of the Guard. Is that what this one's called, right? Recruiter of the Guard?
Yep, that's it.
Nailed it. Man, I'm still on point with my weirdo Commander supplemental products.
Conspiracy.
Whatever. I know what all these cards do. I have a very hard time identifying them by name, though. But it is Recruiter of the Guard. It's going to go ahead and find a creature from Adam Johnson's deck. Power 1 or less.
And I believe it's power 1 or less, even though toughness is more of a white thing, you know, like caring about toughness, because they did not want Recruiter to actually go get Flicker Wisp and then blink Recruiter.
Probably smart. It is going to grab Palace Jailer. We saw Palace Jailer in one of our earlier matches functioning.
Oh, it is toughness 2 or less.
Oh, it's still toughness. Okay. Okay.
Well, I don't know what the hell I'm talking about then.
Well, Flicker Wisp sounds pretty good in combination with that card.
I mean, it's tough when your Vial's on lockdown. You have Wasteland, Rashad, and Port Caracas as your mana, but
little mana intensive.
Maybe it was a consideration that they ultimately deemed to be a fine one, but I do remember them talking about it.
Maybe you were there for that consideration, and that's why you're thinking about it?
I was not. I actually left a little bit after this.
Okay.
Or a little before this, rather.
So Ethan going to go ahead and tap that Ancient Tomb once more to play a Stoneforge Mystic. That's going to go ahead and find one of the crucial pieces of equipment. Often this matchup can come down to equipment advantage. And here you see, it looks like Jite is being pulled to the front. Enough mana to go right ahead and put that onto the battlefield. There it is. Ready to go and pick off all the creatures on Johnson's side if that gets going. We've seen just how snowbally that card is throughout the day here in our Legacy matchups.
One of Ancient Tomb in Gaieski's deck really showing its power here, giving him access to 4 mana. So you're talking about getting an equipment advantage. Well, having a mana advantage certainly helps a lot with that because you're able to move around the equipment at will and actually deploy them a little bit earlier, especially if your Stoneforge Mystic gets killed. And then you also have things like Recruiter of the Guard, Palace Jailer, these slightly more expensive things that Ancient Tomb allows you to cast a little bit earlier. And not every single deck actually plays an Ancient Tomb in it. I think that's a really cool inclusion for Death and Taxes.
And there you see Johnson going to go ahead and basically cycle one of those Caracas, playing a second copy to reach 4 mana to play Palace Jailer. And now Johnson has become the Monarch, going to have access to additional cards as well as answering that Phyrexian Revoker, meaning finally Ether Vial is unlocked, ready to drop some 2-drops onto the battlefield at instant speed.
Yeah, certainly you don't like the idea of using your Karakas as a Lotus Petal.
Not perfect.
But in this situation, you do what you got to do, and Karakas is a card you have to play multiple copies of in Legacy because there are so many threatening legendary creatures around. Most notable is probably Merit Lage.
Right.
That was a huge problem for this deck. So you do what you got to do. Get the Palace Jailer out there. You become the Monarch. Like you said, Aether Vial is now freed up, and now Adam has the mana advantage. And Gaieski has the opportunity to actually equip Jite and potentially get a hit in here, but who knows what could be coming off that Aether Vial.
Looks like we're going to cast a Pithy Needle here. In response, Aether Vial going to be activated. It's going to go ahead and put Stoneforge Mystic onto the battlefield. I've got a pretty good guess about what Johnson is looking to find here. Going to be looking to win that Jite war. And there you see it, pulled to the front. Going to consider all of his options first.
Now, back in my day, if my opponent had a Jite and I played a Jite, they both died.
There was also the period where one would survive, right? The most recently played one would remain on the battlefield if you go back to even prior to that
Right.
legend rule.
Whoever had the first one, you were good. So that rule, not great. And
Yeah, that was
Legends,
a crazy implementation of the Legends rule.
Legend killing each other, also not great. And now you can both have GTAs. More fun for everyone.
Right.
I haven't really seen this happen. Like, someone gets counters first, and then it's really difficult for the other person to actually connect with their GTA. But if both players have GTAs with counters on them, things get weird.
Yeah. So instead of equipping that GTA, we're going to go ahead and activate Stoneforge Mystic, going to put a Batter Skull into play. And I think the reason Ethan's looking at this play is because there is a Swords to Plowshares in hand. See if that's going to try and counteract what that GTA is capable of here. That Pithy Needle still back on Aether Vial.
Well, let's just get it out of the way. These battlefields are getting cluttered. Just put that anywhere.
Yeah, we know that Aether Vial won't be doing anything for the time being. Full grip here for Johnson. Gonna go ahead, tap 2 colorless mana. There's the GTA. Follow-up of Mother of Ruins. That's going to protect some of these creatures on the battlefield presently.
But not great if GT gets a hit in, and that's what it looks like is going to happen. Johnson's all tapped out. Vial's on lockdown.
There goes Palace Jailer.
It feels like Johnson was basically ahead this entire game. Like, he had Aether Vial on 1 that immediately put pressure on Gaieski to try and answer.
Right.
And has done a bunch of stuff like played the Recruiter and just overall just taken more game actions. And Gaieski is basically just like, I'm going to make sure your Aether Vial shut down. I'm going to play a Stoneforge Mystic, and that's it. That's all I have to do.
The concept of ahead is so nebulous in this matchup. It's so hard to determine exactly who's taking the advantage at any given point because it's just so much posturing. There's so many things you're trying to accomplish. Here's a good thing to accomplish. How about another Palace Jailer? Going to grab that Mother of Runes, remove it from the battlefield. Ethan says, I'm the Monarch now, dog.
I don't think he said that.
He did. I read his lips. He said it.
He might have said it.
100%. There you see that Revoker back on the battlefield from that removed Palace Jailer. We'll get a check on what that's presently naming now that it's re-entered the battlefield.
So, yeah, also worth noting, like, he gets the Revoker back. Now he's the Monarch. And you could make the case for it is more important to get GT counters than it is to become the Monarch because Adam's stuck on lands. You could potentially just let him continue to draw cards, and that'd be fine.
Right.
So I don't know. I think this play is close.
So that Revoker's naming GT right now. Wanting to shut off that line from Adam Johnson here.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, just deciding that becoming the Monarch was more important than getting the first GTA counters, and now no one can have them.
Yeah, Ethan really asking, what game am I better equipped to play? And believing he didn't want to play the GTA sub-game, instead wants to play the Monarch sub-game. Here's another Mother of Runes.
Standard classic player.
The last Mother of Runes didn't seem great because you just had to assume that it was going to get shot down by GTA counters.
Right.
But now, this one seems safe.
Yeah.
Their way to the pairings board now. Once again, standard classic.
And if the game goes long enough, that can definitely be a point of differentiation, a way to get damage through in an otherwise impossible to navigate battlefield.
Well, it's still tough because the Batterskull Germ is
It's black. Yeah.
Phyrexian Revoker's an artifact.
Right.
So Gaieski has a little bit of variety in the colors of the creatures that he controls.
No, that's fair. Here comes that Batterskull. Going to go ahead and rumble in, dealing 4 damage, gaining 4 life. Follow-up play here from Ethan is going to be a Stoneforge Mystic. No search. Going to go ahead and draw a card from being the Monarch and pass the turn back to Johnson. Johnson takes a draw. It's another Mom. All the protections available. Ancient Tomb going to be tapped by Rashad Import. There's a Wasteland. Could look to take Johnson completely off white mana. That's not going to last forever, but...
I feel like Gaieski's team were talking to each other, and
he's just like,
Johnson
oh, Wasteland.
Yep, yeah.
The Soul Read.
Or just said out loud, which land should I kill?
Or they all turn their eyes towards the white source at the same time. Extremely cluttered board at this point.
It's kind of funny. I feel like both players sort of had the tools to run away with this game, and despite that, no one could really make it happen. They didn't see a line to where they could have this unsurmountable advantage, and this is just kind of what happens.
They needed to start the snowball and just couldn't do it. Here's Recruiter the Guard. Let's see if this is the card that was needed to unlock everything for Ethan's side. It's going to get a Walking Ballista.
That's a good one.
Yeah, that seems good here. Takes a draw from being the Monarch. Passes the turn back to Johnson. Johnson a bit mana light. 2 of his key permanents completely turned off via Revoker and Pithing Needle. What can he muster here?
I think Johnson's best plan is to try and find some way to get GTA active. But whether or not that's actually realistic, I don't know. I mean, he's stuck on mana, short on white mana, and is spending his mana to tap down the Ancient Tomb because he might not have anything better to do. And that's not a great place to be when your opponent has a personal Howling Mine in play.
Yeah, I think we're looking at Swords to Plowshares in Johnson's hand, but that's not going to do much from this point forward. There goes the white source. And let's see if Ethan wants to move to post-combat main and set up that Walking Ballista. Let's see what Johnson wants to target with this path to exile. Has to consider targeting his own creature and will do so. Going to go find a Plains. Does Gaieski want to respond? He does. Swords to Plowshares. Fighting over who gets to destroy Johnson's creature. It's going to be Ethan here, preventing Johnson from finding the Plains.
I mean, it's basically turning Swords into a Stone Rain, which, as mono-white control,
Yeah.
that does seem like a place you want to be.
Yeah. Well, here comes that Batterskull. Going to try and get in. Just going to be blocked by Mother of Runes. Going to target itself, give it protection from black, so it'll survive that block.
It will survive, no life is gained.
Right.
And Ethan doesn't care too much because next turn he's just going to be able to start putting counters on the Ballista and just mowing down Johnson's creatures. So now, rather than both players having these GTAs that don't work, and so being on parity in that regard, Gaieski has increased his count to Batterskull plus Monarch plus Walking Ballista. So he has all the important stuff going on. He also has mana.
Yes. Yeah, mana's good. mana useful in playing the game of Magic the Gathering, as being proven right now by Ethan. And I think that Ethan has finally turned the corner here and is asserting dominance in this matchup. Yeah, and that's just going to get a handshake from Johnson. Knows the Ballista is enough to keep his entire team off the battlefield. With that combined with the mana woes, just prompts the concession. And we see the team of Gaieski, Corrigan, and Pastore taking down the match in prime position to be in the top 8, maybe possibly.